With all the database stuff out of the way, we can now start focusing on GraphQL, which is the goal of this course. When it comes to creating a GraphQL server in Node.js, there are a couple of options such as GraphQL.js, Apollo Server, GraphQL Express, and GraphQL Yoga. But for this course, we will be using Apollo Server, and specifically its Express integration, which is Apollo Server Express. So let's start by installing the dependencies. Express, Apollo Server Express, and GraphQL. With those installed, let's create a new index.js file in the root of our project. First, we pull in Express. Then the Apollo server. Then let's create a new Express app. Then we can define our port, which will be 4000. Then we'll create a new instance of the Apollo server. This takes an object containing a GraphQL schema or type definitions and their resolvers. A typical GraphQL server is comprised of schema and resolvers. A schema or GraphQL schema contains type definitions that will make up a GraphQL API. A type definition contains fields, each with what is expected to return. So let's create a simple schema. GraphQL uses what is called schema definition language for defining schemas. An Apollo server comes with a package for doing just that. So we need to pull it in, which is GQL. And we can use it like this. We will define a simple type definition, which will be of query. And this query will have a single field, which is say hello. And it will return a type of string. GraphQL schema is useless without corresponding resolvers. So each field in a GraphQL schema, for instance say hello, is mapped to a function on the GraphQL server called a resolver. Resolvers contains the implementation logic and returns data for a field. In other words, schema contains type definitions while resolvers contains the actual implementations. So let's create the resolver function. So we are defining the resolver for the query type and more specifically the say hello field. So we'll create a say hello function that returns a string which will be hello GraphQL. Now we can pass in both the type definition and the resolver. Now, since we already have an Express app, we need to apply it as a middleware to the Apollo server. Apply middleware. Then we'll pass in an object containing the Express app. We can pass in additional configurations such as the path to the GraphQL server, course settings, body parser settings, and other details as you can see. For now, we will keep this simple and just specify we want course enabled. Now we can start the server. We'll listen on the ports we provided. Then we'll display a message to show that our server is indeed running. then the port, then the GraphQL server part. So we now have our first GraphQL server. In the next lesson, we'll see how to run this server and test it out.